Hello, and this is going to be a different way of doing this next section. This is going to be 9a on evolution. Evolution is the change of things through time, and what we are going to talk about this today is going to be 9a, which is talking about the fossil. This first picture, this is a clock detector, represents the whole entire Earth history from 4.6 million years. So this 4.6 thousand million is 4.6 billion years. And it actually takes a look around and it talks about the Precambrian period, which makes up 87% of the Earth's history. This one actually says geologic record begins around 3,960 billion years ago, or 3.96 million years ago, and now current ideas now say it's about 4,280 million years ago, or 4.28 billion years ago. That's B with a billion. We actually do find grains. The grains actually come and make the igneous rock, but this is not really a rock yet. It's just the grains. We can find those happening just about 300 million years after the Earth forms. So it's cool to a point where we can start getting what are called mafic zircons, or basic minerals, dark and dense. Here is what we do with the Earth's history in terms of a 24-hour clock, noon being at the bottom, and the formation of the Earth happens at 0 time. We get meteor bombardment, which is actually called the accretion period, where we actually picked up mass and made the Earth bigger and bigger until around 3 a.m. Made it really tough for life to form in this section because of all these planetary extinction bombardments. And then around 4 o'clock, we started getting blue-green algae, known as stromatolites. And with these stromatolites start actually taking materials in this primordial sea and actually makes them into amino acids and makes them into critters. And then the oldest fossil we can find is happening at around 5 in the morning, 5:30 in the morning, 5:36 in the morning. And then we get to 6 o'clock, and between 6 o'clock and 1:52, so at almost 2 hours after, we start getting what's called abundant iron formations. And these iron formations, the banding, it's actually oxidized iron, so we're actually finding out that there was a lot more oxygen in our atmosphere, and that's actually happening from photosynthesis from these creatures, not from the blue-green algae, but from green algae. And then we get to single-celled algae here around 208, and then we go to 3 o'clock and we start getting, instead of asexual reproduction, we start getting the sexual reproduction right around 6 in the morning. We get the seaweeds, and I'm not sure why it says seaweeds. I would say seaweeds, but in English you would basically say seaweed. And then jellyfish, and then trilobites, a really cute creature, and then land plants, swamp material. Dinosaurs come in at around 11 o'clock, mammals around 11:40, humans at 11:58:43, and the most common human about 11:59:59, which I think we're going to see around here. So the same sort of thing, inferred life, oldest rocks, oldest fossils, first bacteria, then we get cells, there's the jellyfish, there's the seaweeds again, and then we start getting sea life in what's called the Paleozoic, which we're going to find over here. We get the Mesozoic, where we first get the first reptiles, we also get the first amphibians before that, and first insects, and first land plants, and first fish. Then the Mesozoic, we actually, at the end of that one, at the beginning of the Mesozoic, we start getting the first dinosaurs. We get the first mammal, and that's happening at 57:07. First bird, right around 58, 2 minutes before, and you can see these are actually over here. And then we start getting extinction events, where we actually ended up with all the dinosaurs dying out so that the mammals and the birds could take over. And then 59:59 and 9/10 of a second, 1/10 of a second before midnight, that's where the first modern humans. So eras, we have 4 of them, from the oldest to the most recent. The Precambrian period, we have the Paleozoic. Precambrian just comes from the name because the first period inside the Paleozoic is called the Cambrian. So this is all Precambrian, and we have some life coming in here. but it pretty much is not a living area for the Earth. Paleozoic, we start getting explosions of life. And the easiest way to remember what's in the Paleozoic is that the life that lives in the pale. So it is the fish, it is the amphibians, and the reptiles crawl out of it onto dry land. Then we had the Mesozoic, the age of the dinosaur. Mammals happen in this area really early in the beginning, but more like the shrew and not more like the mammals that you guys think of today. But they do have the same characteristics. They have fur and they have give live birth. And then we get to the Cenozoic, which is the last one, and this is the age of the mammals. So very little bit of the time, 65 billion years ago, the dinosaurs died out. 225 million years ago, we had a very, very large mass extinction. And then we go to 544 million years ago, where we actually start getting the explosion of life. These four Precambrian, Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic make up what's known as the entire Earth history. Here is one that actually comes from a website that actually shows you that at the beginning we had very little landmass. These are going to be called the creations, what they're going to create the continents, and you can see as they move around, they run into and they uplift the ocean floor, and they get larger and larger, and then they move around, and then they form Pangea, which is actually about the second time they've been together, maybe even the third time, and then we go to the present. And if you follow it, we have a magma ocean, a very hot place to live on the Earth, beginnings of the crust, we get the blue-green algae, and then we get the first large glaciation where the Earth cooled off. And then we get global glaciation where we had an ice world, and then we have the Cambrian. So this is all the Precambrian. This is not to scale. This is 4.6 billion all the way to 500 million, and that's all called the Precambrian. Comes before the Cambrian. Then we get into the Paleozoic, where we start getting all the other animals, the ones that live in a pale. Then we get a mass extinction, and then we get first mammals. Dinosaurs take over. Flowering plants come in. Mass extinction again, and then we get the blooming of the mammals all the way up to warm, and you are all the way up to man up in this relatively warm area, but you can see temperatures have changed through time. This is a chart that allows you to read some of the time periods. It actually is today. We live in the Quaternary, and it's the most recent Paleocene. And if you take a look from 100,000 to a million years ago, we got humans, modern plants, animals, extinction. So reading through here, the lily of the valley, which is a flowering plant, when was the earliest this plant could first have evolved? Was it in here? Was it there? Was it there? Was it there? Was it there? But those are not flowering plants. The earliest flowering plants actually happen right about that area, although it does say flowering plants, so whoever made this slide may have actually misconceived the idea. This one is a little earlier in time. We have the Paleozoic, the age of the fishes, and then we have the Precambrian. And when is the first organisms on the Earth? When did they come about according to this table? Monera, which are the primary, very prehistoric, the bacteria, the blue-green bacteria. This is one that shows geologic history of New York, goes back to 4.6 billion years ago. These are in millions, which I'm sure it says somewhere, and it actually starts forming mountain ranges, which are named after New York, but the Appalachians, which are part of them. It shows you life in there. It shows you epochs, periods, shows you life in terms of when life came about. It shows extinction events, where some of these things like trilobites lived worldwide from A all the way to this line, and then they died out right at the beginning of the Mesozoic. First life, when we start seeing this is where you actually need to start drawing, and I would like you to draw this prokaryote. Remember, prokaryotes do not have the membrane-bound organelles, and they do not have a nucleus. So prokaryotes before nucleus. These are anaerobic. They do not have photosynthesis capabilities, although there are some of these that are photosynthetic, but these are not photosynthetic, so they do not like oxygen for the most part, and they also do not add oxygen to the early atmosphere. They have to be heterotrophic too because they can't produce their own food. So they had to find food in the media in which they lived. They did have means of locomotion as well as actually feeling, and then they actually took the material in through their cell membrane and cell wall, and they used their ribosomes inside to actually make the proteins, and they used vesicles to digest their food so they can get their carbohydrates and their proteins and their nucleic acids and their whatever one I missed. How many of these three, if you remember the actual processes of glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and electron transport, which actually was the cellular respiration cycle, and how many of these three can this critter actually do? They do not have mitochondria. Remember, mitochondria have two membranes and may have actually been one of these. So all they can do is glycolysis, taking glycose, the sugar, and making pyruvate plus very few, 2 ATPs versus making 36 in here for the 38 total. And then if you look through time, we actually do get the formation of oxygen around 2.5 billion years ago. And the oxygen takes place, and then we lose some, and then it goes uncertain because we don't know what happened in there, and now it's all the way up here at 21% where we like it. This is going to be talking about those red banded irons, and you can see the bands that are in there, and this red band is rust. It's oxidized iron, which actually says that there was oxygen in the air. And here is a picture that I took up in Canada with really beautiful red banding, funky shoes, but really beautiful banding along with the green that was in the area. Beautiful sight. And again, it's showing the oxygen rusting the iron, so oxygen in the air. The amounts are getting concentrated enough that we can actually get that. Here's a comic that I saw in last Sunday's paper that I actually took a picture of and put it in here. And this is trying to show you if it really were this easy. And I would like you to read it. So go ahead and stop the video right now. And so read this. And if you take a look, it's going to talk about two sea critters that finds this urn. And the urn has some very cool writing on it. And it talks about dinosaurs. And it talks about puppies and kittens and aliens and all kinds of really cool things. Relative dating. Relative dating is not actually dating with numbers. It's dating with which is younger, which is older. And older always is the lowest point. And it's really cool looking at the rock record. We do not see man throughout the record, and we do not see dinosaurs throughout the record, and we do not see complex organisms way back when, and we do not see as many simple organisms today. So this is dating rock and fossils by using depth. The deeper it is, the older it is. Problems with this is time. We could have some places where this rock didn't form as quickly, or it formed faster, or it did not form at all, or it formed all at once. Climate. Dry climates do not form soil as much. Plate tectonics tends to squish and deforms all these layers, making them go in all which directions, and if there are fossils in them, just smashes them. And these are what are called trilobites. These are more like shells from mollusks or clams. Looking at a picture like this, the geologists can actually take a look at these layers and actually tell you which is oldest and which is youngest, but they can't tell you that this is a whole lot older than this rock, as old as this rock is to this rock, or that rock is to this rock. But what we can tell you is that E is the oldest, and then G was set upon it, although it looks like there's an erosional plane in between, so it probably got up to the surface and eroded down to that level. Then G came about, and L came about, and then C came on top of it, and then we actually got H happening, which was the faulting, and then it tilted because it's not flat anymore. These layers were put on as horizontal layers, and they are no longer flat, so it actually tilted. Then it got up to the surface again, and it eroded, and then we actually got M forming on top of that, and D forming on top of that, and L forming on top of that, and A burning through the whole thing, and then going up to the surface, and another erosion plane, and then N and K and B, and then it tilted again, and it got up to the surface, and it eroded, and then it went back down underneath water because these layers are sediments, and these sediments do happen underwater. Limestone, which is what these brooky-looking things are, or shale, or sandstone, or all these layers are actually formed underwater at different places. Limestone very, very far away from shoreline. Don't give exact age, it just gives you relative dating. I would like you to draw these. Law of superposition basically says rock on top is younger than rock below. If you actually take a look at this is called a discontinuity, and this discontinuity means that this layer is no longer continuous. And if you take a look at that layer, it is, as long as it is lateral continuity, this continuity actually means that it was once all together and the river actually went through and cut it. If you actually get folded rock, it was laid down horizontally and then folded differently, so you got 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then it folded. And then cross-cutting relationships mean that whatever cuts through the rock is going to be younger than the rock itself. So 4 is younger than 1, 2, and 3, but not as young as 5 because it no longer cut it through. Here is another picture which a geologist can take a look and say C is the oldest, and then what happened was B formed on top of that, and then we actually got, looks like, faulted, and then A got put on top of it, and it had got eroded, and then we got these last two layers, but the one thing that cuts across all of them is E. E is the youngest thing in the picture. And this is a law of original horizontality as well as continuity. If you go to Grand Canyon, the oldest rock in the Grand Canyon is down to the Precambrian, just about as old as you can find on the surface. But if you walk up this layer, they get younger and younger. It all goes up to the Permian period, which is above the Cambrian. It's well into the Paleozoic and actually gets really close to the Mesozoic. And if you take a look at the youngest rock inside the Grand Canyon, it is the oldest rock inside of Zion National Park. And then if you go up, the rock gets younger. And if you go to the youngest rock in Zion, it is the oldest rock in Bryce. And then if you go up along there, you can get the rock that's all the way up into the Tertiary period. So it actually is getting up into the Cenozoic. And then from that, what you can say is that all the layers that are no longer at the Grand Canyon have been eroded away. And the ones that were in Zion, those layers have been eroded away. So the rock that used to be over the Grand Canyon was all the way up here, and we lost 1 billion years of rock in the Grand Canyon. And if there were aliens living in this part of the world at some point, that rock and everything, evidence of them, has been destroyed. This is Horseshoe Bend. This is right outside of Page, Arizona. This is not my picture. This is a picture that I found online. It is a widescreen fisheye picture of the whole valley, but this is actually showing you continuity. This rock is the same age as that rock, which is the same age as this rock. And what happened is the Colorado River cuts down into this rock and actually wore it away. Fossil dating is absolute dating. This is where we take radioactive isotopes and we know that these form, and we watch for them to get to half-life, which is this point right here, where half of the radioactive material, and all radioactive material is saying that the material does not like being what it is, and it loses energy, lots of energy, gaining a more stable type of environment. So how long does it take that radioactive material to turn into its stable daughter? That is called, by the time it gets to half, that is what's called its half-life. And this could be seconds, it could be minutes, and it could be as long as millennia or longer. Some of these actually have 4.5 billion year half-lives. So full 100% to 50, that's one half-life. Going down to 75% is a half-life. Going down another 12.5% is half-life, and it keeps going down until it gets to a point where we no longer can tell the radioactive material is there. Radiometric dating. Dating the rock using the percent of remaining radioactive material compared to its daughter cell. Fully radioactive, half radioactive, 1/4 radioactive, 1/8 radioactive, and if the half-life is 1 billion years, if you get to this point, it had to have gone through these two, so it is 3 billion years old. And this assumes rocks decay at the same uniform rate, and that is not true. But if you actually look at enough samples, like if you well, we will probably do an activity. It will probably be after spring break, but we will do an activity and we'll actually look at short-term return, and we'll actually look at longer term return, and we may even look at some of the material that was actually determined last year with my kids, or even maybe even the years before that. Okay, and I would like you to draw these things. And all you have to do is actually draw that the material changed from radioactive material to more stable, and that by 15%, 50%, not 50%, when 15% is left, it actually is called a half-life. And when it goes down to half again, in other words, 75% is gone, only 25%, that would be 2 half-lives. Using organic material, this is called carbon dating. Carbon dating 500 to 5,370 years. And if you take a look at it, in nature, cosmic radiation will take nitrogen-14, will actually knock off a protein, and 14 becomes carbon-14, and carbon-14 is supposed to be carbon-12, so it does not like to be there, and it is radioactive. And as long as the trees are alive, they will take in this carbon-14. As long as this horsey is alive, eating the grass that took in the carbon-14, it will gain carbon-14. But as soon as the tree dies, the carbon-14 will change back into nitrogen-14. And when the horsey dies, its flesh and its bones will actually turn back from carbon-14 to nitrogen-14. And we know that the half-life is 5,370 years, so we can actually tell how long things are dead, whether it be firewood, bones, or a tree. As long as it's not a petrified tree, which is a tree turned into rock, then all the carbon is gone. 100%, 50%, 5,730 years, another 5,730 years, or 11,460 to get down to 25%, and then another 5,730 to get to 12.5, and then 6.25, and so on and so on. And this will go back to about 50,000 years, 50 to 70,000 years, and then the radioactive material is so little that we can't tell that it's there. The last slide in 9A talks about the old areas of the continents, and you can see this Canadian shield. This is some of that 3.5+ billion year old rock, and it actually continues into the Greenland, and you can see some of them in South America and Africa and Europe and Asia, and even Australia gets some of these really old rocks called cratons. And there is the Canadian or the North American craton, which is actually much more stable and much older than the older material that was picked up through time or washed off the craton to actually make new land. And that is 9A, because you can see if I click again, I get to 9B, and we will talk about Jean-Baptiste Le Mans later. Thank you.